Vivid verses.
I met Claire at a Hartwell's coffee shop on a Tuesday in late October. The kind of afternoon where the light comes in sideways and makes everything look more interesting than it probably is. She was sitting at the corner table with a book face down on the wood, arguing quietly with the barista about whether oat milk constituted a real substitution. She lost the argument, but smiled like she'd won something more important. I was next in line. I ordered black coffee, and she glanced over with the specific expression of someone who has decided you're worth a second look. "You're not going to fight for your oat milk?" she said. "I don't drink oat milk." "Lucky you." She picked up her cup. "I'm Claire." That was how it started, clean and simple, the way most complicated things do. "My name is Ryan Booth. I'm 31. I work as a structural consultant for a mid-size engineering firm called Lanford and Pierce, which means I spend most of my professional life looking at load-bearing systems, finding the points of stress, and calculating how long a structure can hold before something gives. My colleagues find this profession either boring or terrifying, depending on their relationship with architecture. I find it clarifying. I mention this because I think the way you're trained to see the world follows you everywhere, into restaurants, conversations, relationships. I notice stress points. I notice where weight accumulates and where things are trying to hold together. For the first 3 months with Claire, I noticed nothing but the good. She was 33, a graphic designer who freelanced for a string of tech-adjacent companies out of a home studio in her apartment in Meridian Hill, the quieter district of our city, Caldwell. She had a specific kind of intelligence, not linear, not procedural, but associative. She'd connect a Wes Anderson set design to a conversation about grief in a way that made you feel like you'd been thinking about it wrong your whole life. She read everything. She listened like it cost her something. We moved into each other's orbits gradually. Coffee became dinner at Ostra, a small Italian place on Fenwick Street where the owner knew her by name. Dinner became weekends. Weekends became something like routine. Her apartment was organized in that particular creative professional way. Clean surfaces punctuated by deliberate chaos, a drafting table with exactly too much on it, 3 plants she had clearly nursed back from the edge of death. There was a framed print above her desk, a line attributed to someone I didn't recognize. Structure is what separates design from decoration. I mentioned I liked it. "My ex had it made for me," she said, not looking up. He was thoughtful about things like that. I noted the past tense. Filed the information without commentary. We'd been seeing each other for perhaps 6 weeks when I met her friend group, a small, established circle of people who had evidently been through enough together to develop their own shorthand. Petra, who taught high school history and had the kind of blunt warmth that seemed to put everyone at ease. Owen, her longtime partner, who worked in municipal planning and was deeply, almost professionally even-keeled. And then there was Gavin, thin, quick-eyed, with a laugh that arrived slightly too fast to be entirely genuine. We met at Owen and Petra's house for a dinner that included too much wine and a board game that devolved into an argument about the rules. Gavin and Claire were easy with each other in a practiced way, finishing partial sentences, referencing events I hadn't witnessed. Not flirtatious exactly, just intimate in the particular register of people who have history. Driving home, I asked Claire how long she and Gavin had known each other. "Since college," she said. "We dated for a little while, after. It's ancient history." I nodded. The word ancient carries a lot of freight, depending on who's using it. The first shift happened so quietly I nearly missed it. It was a Saturday in early December. We had plans to see a film at the Caldwell Art House, a restoration of something French and long that Claire had been looking forward to for weeks. I arrived at her apartment at 6:30. She opened the door, already dressed in a different kind of expression, one I hadn't seen before. Flat, like someone had lowered the wattage. "I'm tired," she said, not moving back to let me in. I don't think I want to go out. Okay, I said. We can stay in, or I can give you the evening. She stopped. Started again. You're always so reasonable. It's exhausting. I took a moment with that. I'll leave you to your evening, I said. She closed the door. I walked back to my car, drove home, and spent the night reading. I assumed she was having a hard day. Everyone has hard days. She texted at 11:15. Sorry. I was in a weird place. Miss you. The next morning she called and was entirely herself again. Warm, curious, funny. We made plans for the following weekend. I put the evening in the category of anomaly and moved on. But anomalies have a way of accruing. 2 weeks later, a dinner at Petra's. Claire was luminous all through the first hour, telling a story about a disastrous client call that had everyone nearly in tears, and then something shifted imperceptibly around the time the dessert arrived. She grew quiet. When I touched her hand to ask if she was all right, she pulled it away with a precision that felt less like distraction and more like intention. On the drive home, I asked. It was nothing, she said. Okay. You noticed, she said. It wasn't a question. You went from telling a story that had Owen laughing so hard he spilled his wine to not wanting to be touched. Yes, I noticed. She was quiet for a long moment. Sometimes I just get like this. You don't have to analyze it. I'm not analyzing it. I'm checking on you. It feels the same. I'll let the conversation in there. But I kept the distinction she drawn between concern and analysis because it struck me as a very particular way of discouraging attention. January was unstable in ways I kept trying to account for. There were evenings of striking warmth, Sunday mornings when she'd make Bluebell brand pancakes from scratch and talk for an hour about the project she was building, genuinely excited, pulling me in. There were afternoons that felt like standing in bright sun. I wasn't imagining these. They were real and they were good. And then, at intervals that followed no discernible schedule, the cold. Not hostility exactly, more like absence. She would be present in body and withdrawn in every other dimension, responding to direct questions with the minimum viable answer, turning away in a way that made the room feel rearranged. When I asked, she said she was tired. When I gave her space, she said I was being distant. When I stayed close, she said I was smothering her. I made a mental note of this particular triangulation without yet knowing what to do with it. The difficult thing about intermittent reinforcement, and I understand enough about behavior to know what I was experiencing, is that the good periods don't just coexist with the bad ones. They coat them. They make you feel that the warmth is the truth of the person and the cold is a temporary malfunction. So you wait it out. You recalibrate. You try to be patient enough. I am not naturally given to self-deception, but I am capable of it like anyone. I told myself the pattern would stabilize. I believed this the way you believe in a structural repair before you've run the full load calculations. February brought a work trip to Denver. 4 days reviewing a new build with a client. Claire and I had plans for the Saturday before I left. She canceled the morning of by text with no explanation beyond. Not up for it today. Have a good trip. I texted back. Thanks. Hope you feel better. She didn't respond until late Sunday night. Why are you being cold to me? I read this message standing in a hotel corridor in Denver, watching a cleaning cart move slowly toward the elevator. I took a moment to reconstruct the preceding 48 hours. I had been courteous and brief. She had characterized this as coldness. I called her. I wasn't being cold, I said. I was matching the energy of the communication I received. So you were punishing me? No. You canceled plans without explanation. I acknowledged it without complaint and wished you well. How was that punishment? The tone. Claire, I don't know what tone you're reading into a forward text message. The call ended within minutes, unresolved. I went back to my room and sat for a while in the particular quiet of a hotel at 10 o'clock. I was not angry. I was something more precise than angry. I was taking inventory. The Denver trip gave me 4 days of reliable distance. And distance, I've found, is clarifying in the way that stepping back from a wall lets you see it's actually a mural. I started allowing myself to see the whole shape of the last 4 months. The cycles, the accusations that arrived from directions I couldn't anticipate. The way warmth was dispensed in quantities calibrated enough to keep me invested without granting certainty. I am not given to dramatic conclusions. I wanted more information before I decided anything. The information arrived on a Tuesday. I had come back from Denver on a Sunday. Claire and I had dinner Monday, easy, warm, the kind of evening that made me feel I'd been too analytical about everything. And she'd mentioned casually that Gavin was having people over that weekend. Nothing elaborate, just a small gathering at his place in the Venn district. I said that sounded fine. Tuesday afternoon, I left my office early to walk. I do my best thinking in motion and found myself in the Venn district without quite planning it. Lanford and Pierce had done a review on a commercial property there 2 years earlier. I knew the streets. I stopped at a Pembroke cafe on the corner to get coffee before heading home. Gavin was at a sidewalk table with Claire. This would not, in itself, have been significant. They were friends. She had established this clearly, and I had no reason to dispute it. What was significant was the body language. I am not a jealous man. Jealousy, in my experience, tends to precede the evidence rather than follow it, which makes it a terrible diagnostic tool. But I understand proximity. I understand what it looks like when 2 people are occupying space together versus 2 people who are simply near each other. They were leaning in over a small table, coffee cups close together, in the attitude of a private conversation. Her hand was on the table near his. They were speaking quietly. This was not the posture of ancient history. I was perhaps 20 feet away, partially screened by a Pembroke menu board. They had not seen me. I had approximately 4 seconds to decide what to do. I bought my coffee. I walked home a different way. I did not announce myself. This was not avoidance. This was information gathering. If I interrupted the scene, I would get a performance. What I had observed, unobserved, was data. I spent the next 2 days being entirely normal. This required nothing from me that I didn't already possess. Claire and I texted. She was affectionate. She asked about my week. I answered honestly. Nothing in my behavior signaled anything because nothing in my behavior needed to. I wasn't performing composure. I was simply in possession of information she didn't know I had, and I was deciding what to do with it. On Thursday, she called to confirm Gavin's gathering for Saturday. Owen and Petra will be there, she said. It'll be low-key. Who else? She listed a few names I didn't know. And Gavin's friend Margot might stop by. She's in from out of town. I made a note of this detail and filed it. Saturday arrived. Gavin's apartment in the Venn district occupied the top floor of a converted building. High ceilings, industrial finish, the deliberate aesthetic of someone who has thought carefully about how they appear to others. There were perhaps 12 people. Margot turned out to be a compact, direct woman from Chicago who shook my hand and looked me in the eye and immediately struck me as someone worth talking to. Claire was in a good mood. She introduced me to people with what seemed like genuine pride, kept close to me through the first hour. I was beginning to wonder if the cafe scene had been exactly what she said their dynamic was: close friends, old history, nothing more. Then Gavin pulled her aside. I was talking to Owen at the time. I kept my attention on Owen, but I was watching. The conversation between Gavin and Claire lasted perhaps 4 minutes, near the kitchen doorway. Claire's posture changed. The way posture changes when you're receiving something you were waiting for rather than something unexpected. She nodded twice. She touched the back of her neck, which was a gesture I'd observe her make when she was recalibrating. When she came back to me, she was slightly less present. Not cold, exactly. Slightly relocated. I finished my conversation with Owen. I found Margot near the bookshelf and spent 20 minutes in genuine conversation. She worked in architectural salvage, and we had more to discuss than either of us expected. It was, for that stretch, a very good evening. On the drive home, Claire was quiet. "Good night," I offered. "Ma'am, you seemed a bit somewhere else in the second half." She looked out the window. Gavin said something. I waited. He said she stopped. Started differently. He asked if I was happy. "What did you tell him?" I said yes. A beat. And then I didn't feel sure. I let that sit for a moment, hearing it clearly. And then I didn't feel sure. Not. And then I started thinking. Not. And then I had doubts. The sequence was, Gavin asked. Then she was uncertain. What created the uncertainty? I asked. I don't know. He knows me. He knows a version of you. Don't do that, she said, sharpening slightly. Don't be dismissive. I'm not being dismissive. I'm being accurate. He knew you in a particular context, at a particular time. That's not the same as knowing you now. She didn't answer. We drove the rest of the way without speaking. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in what I now recognized as the pattern. Warmth, withdrawal, warmth, cold, accusation, warmth. She canceled 2 plans and suggested them again. She told me I was thoughtful in one conversation and emotionally unavailable in the next. She referenced Gavin twice, once in the context of understanding her, and once more pointedly in the context of a trip they'd apparently taken together years ago that had been, she said, one of the best experiences of my life. I began to understand that I was not navigating a relationship. I was navigating a comparison. And the terms of the comparison were not ones I had agreed to or had been honestly presented with. But I wanted certainty. I'm built that way. Before I make a structural call, I run the numbers twice. I called Petra, and I had built a reasonable independent rapport. She was the kind of person who appreciated directness, and I tried to operate in that register with her. I asked if she had time for coffee. She said yes, choosing Hartwell's on Fenwick, the same chain, a different branch. We sat down, and she looked at me with the expression of someone who already knows the agenda. "You want to talk about Claire and Gavin," she said. "I want to talk about what you know," I said. She wrapped her hands around her cup. "They've been on and off since college. The last time was about a year before you came along. Gavin is," she chose her words with evident care. "He's not a bad person, but he's not good at letting things be over. And Claire is complicated." She looked at me steadily. "She told me you were the most stable person she'd ever been with. She said it scared her." I turned that over. Scared her how? Like she didn't know how to be in something that wasn't a little bit turbulent. Petra set her cup down. "Ryan, I'm telling you this because I think you deserve the honest version. I don't know what she wants. I don't think she does either." "Thank you," I said, and meant it. The clarity came at Owen and Petra's house 2 weeks later. A small dinner, casual, the 4 of us and 2 other couples I'd met once before. Gavin was not invited. The evening was good, genuinely warm, the best kind of evening that exists between people who like each other. And Claire was extraordinary. She was the person I'd met at Hartwell's. Engaged, funny, deeply herself. She had her hand in mine at the table. She told a story about a design project that had gone sideways in the most spectacular way, and everyone leaned in. I watched her and thought, there you are. In the car on the way home, she was still warm. She was talking about a market she wanted to visit Sunday morning, a farmer's market in the Holt Park district that opened early. And then her phone lit up on the seat between us. A notification. I was not looking at her phone. I do not look at people's phones. But the screen was face up and the name was visible. Gavin. I said nothing. She reached over and turned the phone face down. A pause. "He texts late," she said without preamble. Apparently. Another pause, longer. "It's not what you're probably thinking." I haven't told you what I'm thinking. You're being quiet. I'm often quiet when I'm driving. The farmer's market didn't come up again. We drove the rest of the way with the low hum of the radio filling in for conversation. When I dropped her off, she kissed me on the cheek, not the mouth, and got out. I watched her walk to her building, watched the door close behind her. I drove home, made tea, sat in my kitchen. I have a habit in moments that require clear thinking of writing, not in a journal, but just in a notebook, structuring what I know into columns. What is confirmed? What is inferred? What remains unknown? I wrote for about 20 minutes. When I was done, I had a page of notes that, when read together, told a story I'd been declining to read. I did not call her that night or the next morning. I went to work on Monday. I ran load calculations on a community center project in the Renfrew district and found a compressive stress issue in the east-facing columns that had been missed in the initial review. It was a significant catch. I wrote it up carefully. I ate lunch at my desk. Monday evening, Claire called. "You've been quiet," she said. "I've been at work." "You know what I mean?" "I do," I said. "Can we meet Thursday evening?" A short pause. "That sounds formal." "It's not formal. I just like to talk in person." She agreed. We chose Ostra, her choice, the Italian place on Fenwick. I thought it was appropriate. The place where things had first started acquiring the texture of something real. I arrived first and was seated at a table near the back. I ordered still water. I did not review what I planned to say because I already knew what I planned to say. There's a version of these conversations that involves rehearsal and lists of grievances and the particular performance of someone who wants credit for their patience. I wasn't interested in any of that. Claire arrived 5 minutes later in a coat I hadn't seen before, dark green, well-fitted. She looked good. She looked like herself. She sat down, ordered wine, looked at me with the careful expression of someone trying to read the terrain before proceeding. "You look serious," she said. "I'm trying to be clear," I said. "There's a difference." The wine arrived. She held it without drinking. "I've been thinking about the last several months," I said. "Not cataloging them, just looking at the pattern." "Okay," she said quietly. "I never know which version of you I'm going to get," I said. "And I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out if there's a cause I can identify, something I'm doing, something external, a pattern I could map. But I've realized the unpredictability isn't a symptom of something. It's the dynamic itself." She didn't interrupt. I continued. "I think Gavin is still in the picture in a way that hasn't been clearly established, and I think some of the instability connects to that. But I want to be precise. Even if Gavin didn't exist, the pattern would still be a problem for me. The inconsistency is the issue, not the cause of it." "I haven't," she started. "I'm not accusing you of anything specific. I'm telling you what I've observed and what I need." I kept my voice level. "I need stability and consistency. You're offering neither. This ends now." The table was quiet. A waiter passed, assessed the silence, moved on. Claire set her wine glass down. She looked at the tablecloth for a moment, then back at me. Her expression was not angry. If anything, it was something more like recognition, the particular expression of someone who has heard a thing they already knew was coming. "You've been building to this for a while," she said. "I've been paying attention for a while," I said. "That's not the same thing. Is there anything I can say?" I considered this genuinely. "You could tell me I've read the situation incorrectly. I'm willing to hear that." She was quiet for a moment. "No," she said finally, "you haven't read it incorrectly. There's a particular kind of honesty that arrives too late to change the outcome but still matters, and she delivered it with what seemed like genuine effort. I respected that. I didn't soften my position because of it, but I respected it. "Then I think we've covered what needed covering," I said. I paid for the water. She stayed to finish her wine. I put on my coat, thanked her for meeting me, and walked out onto Fenwick Street. The night was cold, clear, the kind of cold that sharpens rather than dulls. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and looked up at the strip of sky between the buildings. Then I turned up my collar and walked toward where I'd parked. The next several weeks passed with the particular texture of a life being reorganized from within rather than from without. I did not dramatize the ending. I did not replay the conversation at Astra looking for different outcomes. I did not spend evenings cataloging what I had lost against what I had not gained. These exercises have always struck me as paying rent on a place you no longer live. I returned to work with a precision that felt earned rather than forced. The community center project in Renfrew moved into remediation, and I found myself genuinely absorbed in the problem, a load-bearing correction that required recalibrating 3 separate points in the original design. There is something steadying about structural work. The building doesn't care about your circumstances. The forces are what they are. In March, Owen sent a message checking in. Not about Claire. Simply, "How are you holding up?" I told him I was doing well, and meant it at the level at which the question was asked. He invited me to a small dinner in April. I said I'd be there. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. I had entered this world through Claire, and I was choosing to remain in it. Not because I was unaffected, but because the friendship was real and it had been built independently enough to stand without her as the supporting structure. Owen and Petra had been friends to both of us, and I wasn't inclined to burn a good thing down for the sake of clean separation. I did hear from Claire once, about 3 weeks after Astra. She sent a short message, not an apology, exactly, but something more honest than that. She said she thought I was right about the pattern. She said she had started talking to someone, a therapist, about some things that had been running underneath her for a long time. She said she hoped I was well. I read it twice. Then I replied, "I hope the conversations are useful. Take care of yourself." I did not leave the door open. I did not close it in a way that required ceremony. The message said what it meant and nothing more. April came, then May. The Renfrew project moved to completion, and I attended the final review with the project lead and 2 city inspectors who asked the right questions. The east-facing column correction held. It would hold for 40 years under standard load conditions. I signed the documentation and handed it across the table and walked out into the parking lot, where the afternoon light was doing what afternoon light does in the better kinds of spring, making everything look like it has been reconsidered and come out better. The April dinner at Owen and Petra's was a good evening. Straightforward. Petra made a lamb dish that had been her grandmother's recipe and would apparently have required specific documentation to reproduce, though she kept the documentation to herself. There were 6 of us, Owen and Petra, me, their neighbor Ben and his wife, and a woman named Diane who taught landscape architecture at Caldwell State and had opinions about the Pembroke Cafe chain that were both unfounded and amusing. We argued about it for 20 minutes with the specific sincerity of people who care about very little but what's in front of them, which is its own form of grace. Gavin was not present. His name did not come up. If there was a gap where something used to be, we were all sufficiently adult to let the evening fill it. I drove home at 11, parked on my street, and sat in the car for a moment in the quiet. I had entered that relationship with good faith and left it with clear eyes. I had not diminished myself in the process. I had not begged for consistency or performed patience beyond what was reasonable, or allowed the instability to become normal by virtue of repetition. When the evidence was complete, I read it accurately. When the time came to speak, I said what I meant without cruelty and without unnecessary performance. This is not a remarkable achievement, but it is the one that matters. There's a version of this story in which I spend the next several paragraphs explaining what I learned, what I would do differently, how I've grown. I find that version uninteresting. The growth is not in the reflection. It's in the fact that I stayed in the room long enough to need reflecting, and left on my own terms rather than the terms of someone else's chaos. Caldwell was quiet on a May night. Down the block, a Pembroke light was still on, the 24-hour branch on Morley Street, which had no business being as comforting as it was. I had no particular destination. I had work in the morning and a Saturday with no plans and a refrigerator that probably needed attention. I got out of the car. The air was soft, the kind of soft that comes after a day that was slightly warmer than expected. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, hands in my pockets, and looked at the city the way you look at something you've decided to stay in. Then I walked up to my door, unlocked it, and went inside. I want to close with something that isn't a lesson. Lessons, in my experience, tend to be addressed to the problem rather than to the person. What I can say is this: the most disorienting thing about inconsistency, real inconsistency, structural inconsistency, the kind that lives in someone's operating system rather than their circumstances, is that it doesn't announce itself. It comes layered in enough warmth that the cold looks like weather. And when you're in it, you tend to do what reasonable people do in unreasonable situations. You adapt. You recalibrate. You make small adjustments in good faith. The mistake isn't the adaptation. The mistake is failing to notice that you've been adapting so long you've forgotten what level ground feels like. I had not forgotten. Not entirely. I just needed a trip to Denver and a sidewalk table at Pembroke and a notebook in a quiet kitchen to confirm what I'd already observed. The building stands or it doesn't. The load is supported or it isn't. You can want the answer to be different, but the forces are what they are. I knew what the forces were. I did what the situation required. That was enough.
Thanks for listening.